He was not joking around. He has a checklist he wants to go through. All right. I tend to joke a lot when I'm nervous.
The best word,
Yeah,
actually,
a coping mechanism. It's better
it's
than
simple.
freaking out. So,
Okay, I think the room is beginning to fill up. So I'll get started. Good morning and welcome, fellow Matt Canvas. This is the second session today in the resilience and recovery track. I have the honor of introducing two experienced mappers. I said to Chris earlier on that he was one of the oldest mappers I knew. And Chris, I didn't mean in terms of age, I meant sheerly in terms of your tenure. Chris was one of the first people who I had a conversation with around mapping, where I had what you might describe as a light bulb moment. He's been involved in all sorts of parts of the mapping community. It was around visualization and sort of creating a mapping platform that we first played. So really, really happy to be chairing your talk. The two of you are going to be talking to us about practical guide to successful change. I fear that there may be tears in this talk. Certainly a lot of pain. So, Chris and Maha, if you could please just quickly introduce yourselves, a little bit about your background and what it is that inspired you to talk to us about successful change today.
Over to you, Maha.
Maha, you're on mute, by the way.
I know, but the thing slid from me. I couldn't unmute.
It's fine.
Right. So my name is Maha, M-A-H-A. You pronounce the H. I say this because I live in France and nobody can pronounce the H. So I graduated in computer science and I stayed the course. I started as a developer and I remained pretty much for the first 10 years of my life. And then I moved on to still technical, but more like more client-facing, let's say, to make it simple. And then I was thrust. Well, it's funny. I'll tell you. I'll talk more about it in my slides. But like all throughout my 20-year career, so yes, I'm 40. I've gone through really massive changes within the company. And the first ones, I didn't choose them. The last ones I did. And this is where mapping comes into the scene for me. And it was a way for making, just drawing a picture, like creating situational awareness, if you will. Yeah, that's what, and then somebody asked me if you want to talk about this. I'm like, sure. So here I am.
Fantastic. Take it away, Chris.
My name is Chris. I graduated computer science many years ago. I was a software developer for quite some time, got bored with that job, joined the paralegal world, become a compliance officer, wrote a piece of law here in Poland. And then I've discovered mapping. It was one of the, I think, 2013 Simon's speech at one of the conferences, got intrigued by it, started worldlymaps.com at that time, joined Leading Edge Forum, had the pleasure of working with Simon for a number of years. Yeah, and been using mapping in practice for many, many customers, and I've seen it work. I've seen the changes work, and I've seen the changes fail, which means that and since I'm naturally a pessimist, I think this will make an interesting, let's say, an interesting contrast to what Maha will show. Yeah. And by the way, in Polish, the H is actually very loud, so I can say it.
It's an easy letter. Like I lived for 12 years in Paris. Nobody could pronounce my name. But now I live in the south of France, right on the Mediterranean. And so there's Spanish and Italian influences, and people can pronounce the H. So yeah, so Maha is an Arabic name, which means big black eyes. And lo and behold, that's what I have. Anyway, right. Just to set some expectations on today's discussion. I will go through, well, the title says Practical Guide to Successful Change, but it's really difficult to set a title, right? I don't know how practical what I will say is, but it's really my experience, what I've seen from changes that I had to just live through, and changes I drove, and my return, on these experiences, right? And then, of course, feel free to raise your hand. I think Damien will do the, what's the word? Coordination if people want to ask questions, but I don't mind being somebody raising their hand to ask a question, or just share something from your side. And of course, then Chris will come and destroy everything I said.
No.
No, I'm kidding. But
Okay.
honestly, the format is I will go through 3 stories. I'll give you context, because I don't want to just come and say, this is how you do change, 1, 2, 3, because so many parameters need to be taken into consideration. And you can really just Google that and it'll give you that list. But I feel like with a story, with context, you'll retain better the information, and maybe you'll relate more, hopefully. So let's go. So there you go. 3 stories: Soft Solution, Murex, and Pfizer. By the way, I'm very distributed. So I'm Lebanese, French, Canadian, and born in Kuwait. You'll see some of that in the, so when people ask me where I'm from, I'm like, from everywhere. So there you go. So Soft Solutions. Soft Solutions is a software company located in Beirut, Lebanon, well, on the borders of Beirut. And so we're talking here 2001, okay? When I joined, I was 21. You can then now easily count how old I am. When I joined, I was 21, and it was already, they were using Pascal and Delphi, and it was already like very old, right? I was a Java developer, and I was very proud of it. And I joined this company. There were it was a 7-story building, and we were on 2 levels. So it was like 180, max 200 employees. Of those, 50 or 70 developers, right? All of these developers were working on one software. That software was delivered to 3, 4 clients, but it's the same software with a bit of parameterization. And that software was mainly what we call big distribution, like Walmart. I'm just trying to think of examples that names everybody would know, right? Like you big shopping malls, but mainly for food, right? The food, or the whole store, big stores, okay? And it will manage everything from what's on the racks to the decision-making headquarters. So there's the decision module, the contracts with the suppliers, the shelving and the product. So all of that, okay? Now, this company was built by, all these Hollywood movies, or the self-made men, like Jeff Bezos and stuff, where the legend goes, they were in their parents' basement and they developed this thing and then it grew. This was a very similar story, except it was in Bsharri in Lebanon, a beautiful village, by the way, that has these 2 churches, one white and one yellow, and these steep hills and steep valleys. They should totally do a Game of Thrones there. It's this guy alone built this software, and with a friend and another friend, they were able to make something of it and sell it in France and start this company. 5, 6, 10 years later, he wanted to change. He saw that it's in Delphi, it's in Pascal, it's old, there's huge technical debt, we need to change. Again, he did it all by himself. He's very much into everything in-house. Everything was built in-house, the vacations, everything. So even the change that he wanted to implement today, he invented it, or he thought it through. He thought the whole concept. And his idea was what? You bring in these highly qualified developers who already know. So it was within the team, right? Because they already know the software, they know the client, they know how things work. But they moved to Java, and then they established the infrastructure. And I mean, it was really thorough. So we had this clean data. So there was a database team. We had a clean database. Each table was represented by, if I'm talking too much technical, just, yeah, let me know. But I think it's, I'm keeping it in English. So just to say that it was clean, you had tables. The tables were represented by Java beans, and then the beans would talk to each other through a session. And then on the, so this is the back end, all the brains, you know, the algorithms, that's where they live. And then you had the front end where it was also very thought through, the tables, the drop down menu, everything at that time you had to create. So it was create, and you, as a developer, me, I would come and I would plug in what I needed to implement in that robust framework. However, he had many Delphi developers, very experienced, very competent, on which he relies, and they were like, "No, we're not moving to Java." I was like, "Well, here's the door," and it was very. They thought that if they leave all at once, they will like crash the company. Nothing crashed. They left, and he recruited massively. I was one of the recruits. Now, the way he recruited, I don't have a lot of slides, okay? So don't worry, it's not like if I say a long time on a slide, doesn't mean anything. It's not an indicator. The way he recruited people was, this is where he put also, same as he invested a lot in the infrastructure, he also invested in the people he recruited. He would always say, like, I can make your grandma code for me, you know, because that's how much he invested in his employees. And for 3 months, we would be going through this rigorous training, and at the end of which you do the test, you pass, you join, or you don't. But then when you join, you have 3 months, and so on. So I went through that process, and I joined, and I stayed 4 years. And the day I joined was the change was already ongoing, but I was completely oblivious. I was just part of the new team, and a bunch of old people who were 30 years old at the time. You know, these old folks, they were leaving, who cares, right? And well, guess what? His goal was move into Java, remove Delphi and Pascal, maintain my client base or improve it, and also in parallel, build the other ideas I have in this new robust framework. And he did all that. So it was a huge success, and he did it in a very short time. In a year's time, we already had the software. We were already where we were when we started, like in the software that we threw away. And other teams were being created, and people, so it was all still, of course, he invested massively in his employees, so he expected loyalty. And it was very difficult. It was very difficult on the employees who left, the employees who stayed, on me. I was 21. Without exaggeration, when they called me, like, we accepted you, come join, I was wearing my beach dress. I was going to the beach, and I came. I was fussy, like, I don't want to come. And but a year later, we had this, and the guy was so brutal. We were on the 7th floor. If you weren't there at 8 a.m., he would shut down the elevator, and you would go up on the. Well, so at face value, it's a huge success. But the human cost, since Lebanon has very non-existing, employee rights, well, it does have, but then you need to enforce them, right? He was able to do this, and people were loyal. People were motivated because they were very excited. They were to prove that we can do it, and the people here were smart, right? Like, and they wanted to show that this was possible, and to show the people that left, it's your loss. And so extremely long hours, but what can I say? Up to today, I still quote him, and I still remember I recognize that he did forge my character and build my technical capabilities at 21. So that's for Soft Solutions, Beirut, Lebanon. Now it's moved to Dubai, but I think still with the same logic. So I'll pause for a few minutes and see if anyone wants to share anything or maybe ask a question.
I have a question. Are they still on Java?
Well, yes. I think
I'm
so.
just
I think
wondering when the next iteration of this, because when
yeah,
he started talking, I thought, well, Pascal to
I
Java,
know.
that must be, yeah, so
Yeah, like it was new 20 years ago, I know, but uh, I think for the purposes of his applications, it still works pretty well. And like Java has moved on also, right? Like it's not stayed. So that said, I'm sure the front end of remember, this isn't a website or an app or something that the mass public uses. This is really dedicated software for a specific function. The function is huge. It does a lot of things, but it's really specialized software. So we don't follow trends because there's no quick turnover. We don't throw it away and just build a new one. This lasts a long time, and it's I forgot what I wanted to say.
it's appropriate
Yeah,
technology for the domain, right? So you use appropriate tools.
it's still the
The,
appropriate
la the
technology. Yeah.
last question from me was just on, you said it was very difficult on existing employees. And what was the long-term impact of that? Was it just relief
Oh,
when the project was over, or was the successful new platform enough to keep everybody happy and keep them around?
oh well, yes, we were happy, but like regularly you would find us like you would find me, my friend on the stairs crying. Like I remember it was 2 a.m., but there was this screen that would load when you first enter the software, the module was the negotiation module. So it had all these prices. And it took like a minute to load. He was like, no, it needs to take under, I don't remember the numbers, but it needs to take a few seconds. And we stayed till 2 a.m. testing, and the tears, I was like, I want to go home. And then my mom came, was like, I didn't bring you to this world, so someone else would enslave you. You come up. Yeah, she was, but it's an exception in Lebanon. Like it has a reputation. It's not a normal company. I don't know why I fell into this company. I just did, and it did forge my. I already had like a robust character. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stayed 4 years. But it makes you see. Like at the time, I hated him, honestly, with a vengeance. And but you'll see the other stories, and you'll see why now. I see why he did some of the things he did. I still don't forgive him. I don't think that's the way. It would have just taken a bit longer, but in a bit more humane way. That's what I'll leave it at that.
Well, I said at the start that I thought there might be tears in this
Oh
story,
yeah,
and many tears. The
so many.
interesting thing about it is you started as this is the positive story, right? And it has tears, it has difficulty of existing employees. So that's quite some setup. Chris, why didn't you take it away with telling us how it can go wrong?
Oh, I mean, um, I have. So for me, when I hear to that story, I can already pick up some key archetypes of people and patterns that will be mentioned a little bit earlier about things which are very difficult to nail if you are not the leader of the company.
Yes.
Because in this particular case, this is the CEO with great motivation and all that stuff, basically forcing his way across the entire organization, right? This is the luxury that CEOs have and people on that level. For us, usual workers, it's the other end of that story. And when you are responsible for driving change in the environment in which you are not the CEO, a situation gets more complicated. As we have seen, people got fired, people departed, they did everything they could to resist the change and they couldn't, right? So it's yeah, that's it. That's my take on the story.
A lot of people fell through the cracks. Like a lot, I saw people just break down. Like so, it's not sustainable. And really, the people who stayed had strong character on top of being competent, and also financially, he was paying us well. So there's that. in a context where, you know, if you compare to France, like in Lebanon, it's a bit like the US in the sense that you take your money and you manage your insurance, your retirement, you do that. So there's very little tax. Well, in the US there is, but in Lebanon there's really very little tax, but because it's up to you to manage all of that. So you really needed to look for good pay. And for someone just starting 20 years ago in Beirut, I was making like $1,200. I was like rich, you know. So I accepted this treatment because I thought if I take it for a while, I'll get a new car. But I was 21. I had other priorities, and I wasn't. I had no attachments. I wasn't married. I had no kids. I did have a life, which I maintained, but on the weekends. Yeah. Let's move to the next story. The next story, it's whoops. Yeah. Yeah, that's the okay, next story. Chance would have, well, I don't know if chance or if I did this, but this company, so Murex in Paris, very different context, very, very different context. In France, I don't know how much you know of the like employee laws, but employees are very well protected. And honestly, I take my hat off. It's a very fair system. So they can't do that. But it just so happens that the person, I like just to give you the background of the person who created this company is also of Lebanese, he's Lebanese and French. Also another math genius, but this one was like a math genius. So what he did was simply write a module for traders on an Excel sheet. And he showed it to a trader. And he's like, I would pay you money for this. And he's like, okay, how much? And so on. And then he understood that there's a market for this. And this is how it started. But this guy was already from a rich family. It's like this is really like Jeff Bezos. He did have the money for it. And so from the start, it was a strong, not like the other guy who really like, he was like his village, very rugged, very sharp. So this guy came from money, and the company was built. It was also very well paying. It was like 30% more. The salaries were better than the rest of the market. I joined. So the other company, I was a developer. In this company, I saw how the developers were working, and even though I come from soft solutions, I was like, I can't take more years of this. I move into the technical consultancy, but it's not like consultancy when we say in the US where you're not an employee. You are. It's just I'll explain more. The idea is we were like 3,000 employees. 2,000 of them were in Paris, distributed on like 3 buildings next to each other, and the developers were like 500, 600, again, all developing one software. This software, very different than the other one. It's very complex. It's not that it's complex in the sense that there's many layers to it. It's aimed at trading banks. So not those banks where we put our money, those banks that make the crises every 10 years, those ones. And these banks trade with huge amounts of money. They have a big number of desks. A lot of data comes in, goes up, goes down, needs to be digested, consolidated, calculated. There's so many calculation engines happening to project so. But how was the company structured? So you had the developers who were part of it. Each like 3, 4, 5 developers were part of a team that also included the technical consultants who would also have to have 2 hats, the developer hat and the financial hat. We weren't financial, so I worked on it. I don't understand finance, but I would need to go talk to a trader and kind of understand what he wants so I could tell the developer and so on. So we do have 2 hats. So you had the developers in teams of developers, consultants, and product managers. So these were the product teams. They were entirely dedicated to the product, and they were in their own bubble. They did their own thing, however they saw fit. on their own product. So different product teams didn't necessarily talk to each other, didn't necessarily even use the same technology. Some were C, some were C#, some were Java, and some were something completely. So it wasn't one whole single kind of, it wasn't one single platform. It was a monolith, but all like conjoined together somehow. It was a freak. It was huge. And what happened was when I joined, I was in a team that would combine like interface between this system and other systems in the bank, because one complex system is not enough. They have to have many. So I would do the interfacing. What happened was it grew so much, it became very painful to simply, like for people who know this, just to submit some code into the mainstream, it was a whole thing. It was a big deal. And people needed to synchronize, and there was a team dedicated for that. And to deliver to clients, it took several weeks, and it was always messy and like had regressions. So we had very, very big technical depths. Teams weren't talking to each other, and we were creating this monster that we were losing control of, because some blocks of it were so old, nobody would dare touch them. And we had these 3-4 diva developers that would never go on vacation. And this was France, which is a sacrilege, because if they did, c'est la catastrophe. It wasn't sustainable. It had to change. It became too expensive for the client, not just for us, but the client. So who took the decision to change? It's the technical people. So the company had like two heads. The guy that created the company is not technical. He's a math whiz. He does the modeling, because the software, that's what it does. That's the force of it. It models the trades in a very good way, and it handles the trade from before it's booked, while it's being booked, and after it's booked, and at night and the next day. So all of that is handled. And that's what this guy knows. And then, subsequently the teams that under him. And then the CTO comes from a completely different world. And he was like, we can't continue this way. Whereas we were very successful on the financial front. We were like #1 constantly every year. But the CTO was like, get me out of here. What do we do? So he took the decision without really consulting other departments. And the other guy was like, whatever, if you want to change. He didn't really, he trusted the CTO. So this is what they did. They searched the market for a methodology, a framework. And after a few trials and errors and very constrained testing, they chose something called SAFE. SAF capital and E small letter. And I sensed this change coming, and I was like, I want to be part of that change. And I joined the team doing this shift. And this is where, just go back to Chris's comment that I got bored with it. The reason I chose computer science is because I really did not want to take people's responsibility into my hands. I don't want to be a lawyer. What if I lose? I don't want to be a doctor. What if I misdiagnose? I don't want people's, I want something, I do it by myself, I submit it, I'm good. But this doesn't mean I don't like people. I like people very much. Just I don't want to be responsible for their well-being. So this was perfect for me because I had this legitimacy where I've been in the shoes of the developer. I've been in the shoes of the technical consultant. I forgot to mention. So there's the product team, and then there's the client team, who would then go to the client and implement this monster. And it would take them like a year for a group of 10 people to install this at the client for all the parameterization and so on. So all these people needed to start discussing, but the change came from the product team, the technical part of it. So they saw this framework, they wanted to adopt it, but they didn't just stop there. It didn't stop at the CTO level. They brought in, he used a bunch of architects. These are very different architects. The ones I talked about before really had their hands in the software. These architects are a bit arrogant. They're like a bit outside, and they just judge people. I like them less, but they did do a good job. Together, so this CTO and the architect, they did invest in the knowledge also, and the soft skills. So not the technical knowledge here, and making people, how to convince people to join this change and change their behavior. What was the point of the change? We needed to break the teams. We needed the teams to talk to each other. We needed to break the monolith of the software. We needed to make it, well, a bunch of modules that we can, there's one pipe, let's say, and then we can branch the modules according to what the client buys. And then it becomes very lightweight for implementation and migrations and updates and so on. That was so what they did. So they invested in this. In this knowledge of how to move, how to become agile. They did trainings for all the developers, for all the product team. And what I liked about this was there was a lot of inspiring moments. So the people in the trains, this is what this methodology calls the bunch of teams, they call them trains. They were passionate about finance and about the models, the mathematical models they are developing, if you can believe it. So it was very motivating to work with them because we had very clear goals. We knew, for example, one of the things we needed to implement, like to take into consideration, was that the BAL or the Basel meetings happened, and these new regulations came out, and we needed to implement them. I lost my it's fine. So yes, the discussions that were being had around the technical aspects in order to respond to the functional needs, the new Basel requirements, were really inspiring. So you had a clear roadmap, and because we had this very prescriptive, like directive methodology, we had very clear roles and responsibilities. Who does what, where, when. It was super directive. Like it would tell you, it would dictate, I would say, how many people should be in a team, how many meetings you should have, what is to be discussed in these meetings, who manages the meetings, who takes notes, do you take notes, who stands, who sits. I swear it was very directive. And they thought, we need this because when you're, it's like when you're riding a bike, the first time you do it, when you have these extra wheels, it's just so you get a hang of it, and then your body starts snurring, and then you remove them. So we really need these wheels. This is what they consider this. And with time, the more people joined, the less restrictive, and the more they adapted it so that it would fit what they wanted to do. But the big lines remained the same, which were, we're no longer just separate teams. We are all, there were like 6 trains in all. Each train was to deliver a big module, right? And each train would be consisted of 10 teams, let's say. Something like that. And each team would have everything they need to deliver their part, right? And so it describes how we were to be structured, how we were to meet on the team level, and then everybody together in the train, and then the trains. So what happened was, there was clarity. The leader wasn't this aggressive dictator, but he had a clear vision. There was this North Star, and we were going in that direction. And what really helped, I think, we had excellent project managers, which really inspired me, because they worked on following the progress. Because every time you ask people, when can you deliver? Everybody's very optimistic and very confident. But the fact is, life happens and you never deliver on time. So we created these, I was part of that team. We created these Excel sheets, basically, that would have these modules that would predict, according to the data we collected on you, like when really you will deliver. And And it really made the idea from these metrics wasn't to judge or to rank. It was to say, this is the reality. Are we okay with this, or do we want to do something about it? Do we reshuffle our priorities, or are we okay with this? So constant, every month, right? And so the clarity was maintained. It didn't get blurry. It didn't get. However, we did have also a lot of pushback, and we did lose a lot of people, namely what we used to call in the company the dinosaurs. So, but these were very old people, like in just before retirement. I'm not saying people at the station work, but it was impossible for them to adapt. And so they were moved they were shelved basically. And a lot of people who weren't in the initial trains, of course, weren't happy about these trains, but then they understood better when they became part of the change, and they joined. And then, so I left before I saw the end of it. I did see that the product department changed. The product department changed massively, and the software we were producing was much better quality. The deliveries were much easier. Didn't drastically change overnight. It took 4 to 5 years. So it was long in the software world. And imagine 4 to 5 years, you're not part of this train and you're still in a place. So it's hard. And a lot of people left because they felt excluded, irrelevant. But in itself, it took a while. It was incremental. It was driven by the CTO, not the CEO. It cost a lot. And they used a known methodology, but with time they adopted it. But I do think that they need to go through another change, because it's a heavy framework. It's like you have to meet every 3 months the whole 60 people. It's a lot. It's very expensive. It's a very expensive model, but this company is rich because they get all their money from the banks. So for me, it's a semi-success, because it could have gone better, and it could have cost less. It could have cost, and we lost very competent people because it took too long to get them on board, and so through no fault of their own, right? They became irrelevant for a while, yeah, but they didn't wait. So that's the second story in Paris. Are we good on time? Yeah. I still have one more, but I pause a bit. Yeah.
No, go ahead. That was super clear. So different from the first one in terms of the modularization, so the fact that there was siloization. Summarizing, I've got a high certainty, low efficiency, right? So they knew exactly what they wanted to do and how, but just did it in a super painful way. Chris, I see tears in your eyes. You're on mute.
Yeah. I mean, this is another super interesting case when there is like I mean, the moment I've heard dinosaurs, this is another aspect that I want to talk about. Mostly because you can imagine that people come with all of the baggages, plans for life and stuff like that, and they just not be willing to accept the change or the direction of change because it's against their personal interest. And it's almost like I hate that word, but I haven't found better. It's almost like if you want to introduce a change, it's almost like a political game or empathy game, because you need to understand who is in the situation and what are their real goals, not goals that they are comfortable expressing, right? Because that's the easy part, right? But the real goals. And frankly, I still remember a person, I think it was a CIO or a CTO of a relatively big company back at the leading edge forum times. I've asked that guy what was his biggest challenge for the next 5 years. And this guy, with really disarming honesty, said, I want to survive till retirement without anything exploding on my watch. Yeah, so you can imagine how this organization worked, right? But he, at that particular time, and this is why I still remember the story, he was very honest about what are his real priorities. And I imagine that he never verbalized it inside his organization. Because if he said that, he would be removed from the position. And this is the sort of the, I don't know, thinking or human skills or the really tough part about the change management, that you need to really, really connect with the human aspect of the change and actually focus on people much more than we, or definitely I as a ex-computer scientist, would like to admit. That's the reason for tears. It's almost like a full circle. I wanted to go to computer science to avoid talking to people, and here I am talking about people. Yeah.
But that's so true. That's also my experience in that, you know, first I was comfortable just doing my technical stuff and everybody leaving me alone, but it wasn't enough. I didn't really enjoy it, and I really wanted to go see. And so doing these massive, or this at this point it was one change project. I spent most of my time talking to developers, trying to understand, because there was a lot of pushback. One developer came with a book to a meeting where we had 60 people with this book, just to say, you know, I'm not going to say a bad word, but just to say, you know, I don't care. I'm only here because I have to be, but all of this is bullshit. So you can't, you have to go talk and understand. And I did, and I understood what were his fears. And so I ended up working with people, but resolving technical or team structure stuff. So resolving work stuff and not like personal stuff with a risk. So it was a sweet spot for me. And the baggage I had was that because I've been through their shoes, I could understand their language well, at least the employees, not management. I wasn't in management. But still, so when I was in Murex, I was looking back at soft solutions, like thinking, if, you know, the guy's name was Name. If Name was here, he would have done this, you know what I mean? But he would have lost so many, there would have been blood. So I think it's a fair model. It's semi-successful. It cost them a lot of money. They only were able to do it because they have the budget. But I don't think it's repeatable the way they did it. And I don't think it's a very long-term thing because it's exhausting. It's nonstop. Like you don't get a break. So how long can people maintain this? So yeah. But again, the person driving it is the CTO. So the developers all lined up and everybody, which brings us to the last story where it's not at all what happened. So this is Pfizer. I'm a bit, so I'm still in the middle of this. So maybe the opinion I have today will change down the line, but at least this is my honest opinion for today. And I'm also being recorded, so I don't want to say anything that may come back and, you know, bite me in the rear. I have to be careful, but honestly, it started so well, but it ended with a flop. And let me explain why. And this is where I met mapping and all of that. And I thought I could use all my experience with like change management, talking to like federating people into change, doing these metrics that are really somewhat predictive would help with this change, but I'll show you, I'll tell you why it did not work. So first, the context. The Pfizer isn't a software company. Let's start with that. Whereas the other two, that was really the heart of their business. This is a pharmaceutical business. And they have this huge IT that is there to enable software development. So what kind of software? We're talking about like static websites, like informative websites, maybe a website with, you know, when the COVID happened, they did these websites. I forgot what it was. It was around COVID, but if you took your vaccine, or, you know, you fill in a few information and it tells you what you need to do, but like, okay, it's not informative, but it's not very complex either. And they have mobile apps, a lot and a lot and a lot of mobile apps that go hand in hand with the medical treatments that people need, but nothing that is used massively by the population. It's really, I hope nobody here ever uses them, but it's really because you're sick and you need something to help you with this treatment, to remember your dosages and so on. So, but of course, it's a huge company and there's a lot of software to be supported. So this is what this department does. Okay, when I joined a very specific team, and what this team does is it has this platform within Pfizer for mobile developers anywhere at Pfizer. So they don't have to be fellow developers from the same department or from the same team. No, anywhere in Pfizer, they can come and use this platform so that they create their apps and they're able to publish them on, Google and Apple and even the Pfizer store, right? So naturally, these people, they don't control this platform because all the standards and all the like the technical constraints are made by Google and Apple. But they do have a layer of Pfizer to add, which is the branding, the security thing, and so on, right? So they control an aspect of it, but not the whole thing. But everybody who wants to publish a Pfizer branded app must go through this platform. But like, it can be anyone, anywhere, right? Because teams get created for a project and then they get dissolved. And there's a lot of times it's consultants that just are recruited for this and then they leave. So what happens is the people building the apps leave, and then the apps are still here and they're on the platforms, right? But apps are living things, apps and websites, and you can't just leave it. So another team handles that. And these teams, so the platform team and the support of the platform, they don't talk to each other. They don't know, like they don't. And this is just one example of everything in this department. And it grew like times 10 in 2 years. And the person managing the department wanted to understand what the heck was going on. But mainly, not because he wanted to see, he is not into micro or even macro management. He just wants to know where to spend his money. He has a budget coming in that he needs to distribute. He needs to be able to make a decision where to put that money. And this is where mapping came. Except they got people who came in to implement something called OSOM, Organized Services Operating Model, based on Simon Wardley's mapping and based on that logic, but on which they added their framework. So they took something that is a technique. So it's not a methodology, right? The mapping, it's not a framework. It's a technique that you use to clarify things, to create situation awareness, to understand what's going on. And they added a framework to it, and they proved its worth by implementing it several times, and that being a success. So they wanted to do the same at Pfizer. However, remember that the teams are very distributed in different countries all over the world, different time zones. They are extremely specialized in what they provide, and they basically have very low visibility on other teams. So when a ticket is open, right, you're a user, you don't know what the heck's going on in the whole department. You have a problem on some software or on an app, you open a ticket. You expect the return on a ticket and the problem solved. No. This ticket may require that you open several tickets just to resolve your one issue. And that was unacceptable, right? I need to be able to just get my issue fixed as a user in one place. It's like when you go to a government administration and you need to get a paper and it tells you, they tell you go to that floor, get that paper, and then when you get that, go to the 5th floor and get that stamp, and then when you get that, go to the basement and get that other stamp. But you have to do it in this order. It was something like this, right? And we needed to transform from that to, I go to one desk, I submit, and I don't know, 2 days or whatever is necessary, I get my ticket resolved. This is what the teams wanted, and the exec wanted the money distribution. How do I do that? So they chose OSOM. However, what happened was okay, so I can't say CEO, CTO, because those people are way up the chain in Pfizer. But in the module OSM, we called this person responsible for this department the exec. He was the executive. And for me, he was not available. He was not present. He was distracted. He was never here, and he never pushed. His philosophy is, if this is something worthwhile, it will thrive. If it's not, it will die. However, he condemned it to death because people, like getting external consultants to force people to change the way they work, to merge teams, that's not going to happen, because we need decision making and we need budgeting, and that wasn't going to happen. So basically, they chose a governance model for someone who did not want to govern, for someone who wanted a model that governed itself, that he did want one aspect of it, which is the services. Just a quick description of what a service is. Instead of talking about teams and say, this team manages the support of mobile apps that are on the Google store. This team supports, instead of saying that, we have the mobile app service. And so you come to the mobile app service to get your mobile app stuff sorted. And so on and so forth, right? So it becomes a holistic thing, and it does the super. And if you change, you remove Google, you put Apple, maybe tomorrow there's something else. For the user, it's even if it's a tech user, like a developer, they don't care. They just want their app published, you know. So the methodology is very non-prescriptive, very adaptable, very lightweight. And at the beginning, we had a lot of enthusiasm. All the ask was, instead of talking about teams, describe what you provide and create, some kind of contract, and let's see how you deliver on it. And how can we help you? This was the position of the exec. I don't want to judge people. I want to see if I can help them deliver. Okay. But people who didn't deliver, there wasn't any, well, not the people who didn't deliver, but the people who didn't abide, didn't create their contract, there were no consequences. And the idea was that instead of having teams, we would have services and service managers. Service managers would be autonomous on their services. They would have their own budget. They would have their own teams that they can create, dissolve, whatever, recruit. They would have their own methodologies, and then they report to the exec, like on a regular basis. There was a whole logic to it, when to report and why and in which case, and depends on what kind of budgeting you need, and so on and so forth. But even that, he didn't want to do. Result, we stopped it, and we're now analyzing what worked, what didn't, and we're not downgrading it, but we're shifting the focus from this being a model for the exec to being a model for the service managers, and maybe we'll revive it at their level, and whereby they become autonomous to a certain extent, not the budget, but like how they deliver. And mainly, we would like, if we can, to create a community where these people talk to each other and exchange notes. That has started, but the budgeting is still very, very, very far from being anywhere near clear. And honestly, it was the budgeting that made me enthusiastic about this project, because never in my life, in my 20 years experience, when you work on a project, it's very clear, the budget is clear, like, because the client holds the budget and he knows what he or they know what they're paying and what they're not paying, and you better describe to them what they're paying for. But when you're a product team and you're developing a product and you're working in your bubble, Nobody has any clue of the costs. Maybe the salaries, yes. But like, are you counting the servers? Are you counting all the software licenses? There's so much. And I'm like, if these guys pull this off, this is huge. And we used mapping, but honestly, it did not work, because I think the people were not ready to put in the time and the work that required, and to deal with the consequences of actually changing. All they wanted was for things to stay like they were, more or less, but with some kind of catalog where we can see what we have. But then let's not, ruffle any feathers. Let's not share the budget too far and wide. So yeah, it didn't work. There you go. So at the end, my conclusion, and all this time I would remember, past discussions at Murex and all the people that inspired me, and then at Soft Solutions and all the, the grit and the. So for me, when people during the years, people were so. I don't know why people get stuck on ideas like this. It's like a religion. Like, I mean, we want to be agile, or we want to use Kanban, or we want to use Scrum. I mean, chill, it's only good when it's doing what you want it to do. So you take the idea, but do it at your own sauce, provided people understand what you're doing, and provided really you need to have a clear vision on where you want to go. And I think this was one of the main problems of the Pfizer group I worked with, is that the decisions weren't coming from this exec. They were coming from higher up, and the exec was just saying, today we're no longer using Laravel, we want to use the Adobe platform. And they just switched. Instead of this being a discussion to be had within the services framework, he just had to execute. So he's not in control of the direction. So the objectives were never really like, having financial budget isn't an objective, it's a consequence. Like, if it's an objective, get the accountants to do it, right? So you need to have clear vision, to have clear objectives, and appetite for investment in time and knowledge, competent and driven people. At the very least, a few that would carry the team. Not every single body needs to be competent every single day and driven no. But you need a few people who can boost, and fair and reasonable metrics that focus on the end result. Like the metrics that count the tickets, or how many times I did a submit, or how fast I can release. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. But it's what we care about is where you're going. How far do you know now where you are in this? Do you have something that would objectively tell you where you are? And please do your risk management. Always be aware of the context around you. Like, for example, that was one of the huge mistakes in the Pfizer, that I didn't know that something like a security breach would halt and would take completely all the attention, And of course, risk management is something that is very alive, that needs constant review and good communication. So this is the recipe. If you find it in jars, let me know. But yeah, there's no magic methodology. It's really, you can get inspiration, but you must adapt it, and you must be ready to do the time. That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's really good. I wanted just to give Chris and Maha a minute, of which we just have 1 minute, just to address a question from Rob Seringer in the chat. I found this super interesting myself, based on a previous talk around acceptance of change, around getting outsiders involved in mapping, not traditional communities. So the question is, people are a huge factor in transformation. Computer science people should have exposure to anthropology, and that's asked as a question. Further question, have we mapped the dynamics of human acceptance of change, which I think is just a great idea.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, let me answer those in a very long-winded way. Maha, if it's okay, I will take over the
Yeah,
screen
yeah, please, please.
for a second, because I will start with this, I think right now, very controversial slide, which means that the change can happen instantly. And I will use an example of a, let's say, pharma company. It's not really a pharma company, but that's not relevant, which had 5 units in Europe or 5 departments in Europe scattered across the entire continent. And they were using WBS code, which means like when you are working on a project, you are actually entering how much time have you spent on a particular project. And they were logging their work, whatever they were doing. And at some point in time, one of the very clever executives wanted to optimize the company efficiency, and they have decided to close the center which had the lowest utilization rate, right? So which locked the least amount of time. As a result of that, all of the remaining centers immediately reached 100% utilization. What happened here was that the moment people realized that the weakest one will be closed, they all started forging their metrics to reach 100%, right? Because nobody wanted to be next. Unfortunately, it took nearly 5 years to figure out what really happened for the executives, because after a really long time, they had to do pricing of a relatively large product. So they went to analyze all of their data, and it turned out that their data was completely useless because the amount of work which was put into smaller projects didn't describe the reality. Which actually brings me to the point, is like that change happened almost like overnight. So why do we even talk about change management? Why is that difficult? And I've got here a hunch. It's not just like an answer, that we are talking about the emotional aspect of the change. And we call it a change if it's difficult. Otherwise, it just happens. Just to go to your Maha earlier examples, for example, people letting it go one way or another. And it's almost like the change is a way of manipulating the reality, where you are taking an effort to reach to a certain state. So there are changes that you like and there are changes that you don't like, which brings us into the social space, because it's not like everyone likes every change and it needs to be negotiated. And I've tried, Rob, partially answering your question, I've tried to actually analyze who likes what and what drives certain groups of people within the organization and within the society, to go to a slightly bigger group. But this map is so complicated that I don't know where to start talking about it, because I mean, on the top you can see employee, managers and owners, but it doesn't really cover all of the spectrum which happens. A little bit lower you can see culture, and this is extremely important because the cultural behaviors, it's how the company works, but they are frequently not realized, or they are unconscious. Like, for example, using a different metric to close a particular center, or belief systems which are even lower and less visible, which make people act in certain ways. One of the, of the most peculiar beliefs, and this is just my hypothesis, but I find it extremely funny, is that you can actually link German Protestant religion with current focus of some people around becoming rich, because there was a belief, I think, in Protestant Germany, that if you are a good person, God will bless you and you will become rich, which can be easily translated that if you are poor, you are not a good person. I mean, it's a logical mistake, right? But many people think in this way. So since you are getting almost like a religious obsession on getting rich, and this influences how people think, act, and in which way or which changes get accepted and what motivates them. But before we get there, I think that's the most important slide. Map is not the territory. I mean, if you even know what are the key capabilities, components in a particular situation, and doesn't give you an upper edge in change management, I mean, perhaps a slight one, but because the map will not tell you what people want. Yeah, and even, I mean, if you look at the theory of change management, it has been described relatively well, right? So there is a couple of steps that you need to do in order to make a change, right? I don't know. I mean, so let's put aside the theory. The other one is a little bit more interesting. It's about how do you change individual behaviors. So it's the motivation, ability, and prompt which drives the behavioral change. The motivation is, again, an internal property of a person. The ability and prompt, they can be modified externally. But without motivation, the behavior will not change, and the change will not be introduced. And this theory, I mean, it looks perfect on paper, but I want to show you an example of how does it look like when it is being implemented in the wrong way, and then we will explore what is we will explore what went wrong. So a mini case study, and by the way, this is a real one. So imagine an insurance company. I mean, there's plenty of insurance companies in Europe, and they've got a goal. They want to move to the cloud. Like, it's one of their strategic goals. They will apply the 6R approach because cloud is cool, because people like Simon are talking that the cloud is the future and multi-cloud is even better, and things like that. You don't want to build your private data centers. This 6R model is like rehost, replatform. I think it was derived by or created by McKinsey. And they are implementing this change management plan. They are deciding which apps to move where and how, what to do with them. But there is a challenge. There's a few teams which says that this is a stupid direction and that, excuse me, migration to the cloud is far too expensive to justify the effort. Those could be dinosaurs, Maha, to relate to those people, right? They don't want to learn new stuff. Those could be like actual experts, like they know what they are talking about, or those could be people who will be fired when their apps are migrated to the cloud. So what the company did, the only reasonable thing, they have decided to hire more cloud enthusiasts to balance naysayers. Can you imagine this sort of the solution to the problem? It's not like trying to orchestrate the change or make it happen or motivate people. We are just going to hire people who will hopefully balance out naysayers and will lead to a situation where the change actually happens. What went wrong here? Nobody really understood what are the arguments of those teams. And now the question is why. And it has been revealed in a conversation slightly later. And I find it hilarious, but when you are in this situation, it will be relatively sad because of the hidden goals. And the hidden goals were quite simple. There was a corporate strategy, but not the one written with fluffy words which everyone can read, but rather like internal sets of goals for each of the board members. And one of the board members was responsible for realizing the benefits of the cloud in 2024. Now, imagine that's not written on paper. I mean, it can be written, but it isn't communicated to everyone. What is communicated is that we will move to the cloud, but not that if that executive fails to do so, they will be let go, right? So the executive is extremely focused on getting the goals done, not necessarily getting the goals done in a proper way. And the executive is seeing roughly this statement. Consulting companies say cloud is great. Engineers say not really. How they are supposed to make a good decision in this case, given that they don't have the exposure to individual details, I mean, to low-level details about what does it really mean, move things to the cloud, and what will be the impact to the organization. They don't know it. It's like a couple of layers below the abstraction, the abstraction interface. So they do everything they can to manipulate the environment so that their goals are made, and people who are lower in the hierarchy are actually expected to align to this particular change, whether it makes sense or not. That's the hierarchy of an organization, and I think it can be generalized to the hierarchy of the entire society. And I want to show you like 3 different categories of people. This is based on the work of the Venkatesh Rao and perhaps some additional stuffs with a little bit of liberty from myself. 3 categories of people with 3 different motivational paths. The first category of people are people who cannot meet their basic needs, and the threshold of their, let's say, yearly income for the United States is somewhere, or was somewhere, $80,000 per year. It means that if you are living below that layer, numbers for you to be verified if you are interested in that, if you are living below that layer, it means that you will have to make priorities, and you will not be able to afford everything that you need to afford to. So you will have to, for example, prioritize health over retirement, or the other way around, or things like that. Very difficult choices. It will be the question of whether you want to educate your children, whether you want to go on vacation. Basically, tough situation. And people who are in that position, their primary mental focus is around survival and getting their needs met and making difficult decisions, right? So they will comply with any change request as long as they can satisfy their primary needs. I know I can be a little bit unfair here. There are exceptions and things like that. But when you think about people working, let's say, in delivery centers, in factories, in manufacturing organizations, because of the situation they are in, they are trading time for effort, and they don't have the capacity to think beyond that. So if they are told to work in a particular way, they will work in a particular way, because otherwise they will lose their source of income. And because they are tight for money, that means a lot of trouble for them. So they are rather motivated to go with a change. We can say that above this threshold, $80,000 per year, roughly per person, there is a different, people in that situation have slightly different motivation. Because if you are above this layer, it means, again, with all the exceptions and differences in how the wealth is distributed, then you can roughly afford everything that you need for basic life. So you can think about what will make you happy, what should you be doing, and perhaps what do you want to do in order to be successful in your life, and you have some resources to think about that. And this group of people is particularly interesting when you talk about change, because unless you nail down what they are really motivated by, you will not make them change their behavior. Let me rephrase it in a slightly simpler word. Because those people have a freedom of choice, because they have some resources, because they have financial backups, they can afford some negotiations, and they want to do the right thing. This is important because doing the right thing is cultural. And finally, there's the third category of people, which are like a total disaster for the organization. And those are people whose primary motivation is to control their own destiny. It's not benefit of the company. It's not the benefit of the society. It's their own situation. And they focus on not avoiding work, but getting themselves in a position where they can control their reality, fighting anything that has negative personal consequences, which means that if your change is going against them, you will have to face them and somehow convince them that you are not going lower their position. And for those people, status is more important than career. Those are the people who will very likely go from a company to company, start an individual project or a set of projects, and leave before this project is being completed or before anyone is being capable of evaluating what are the consequences of running that particular project in a particular way, right? It gives them a strike of very good career position without actually providing any results. They are basically gaming the system. And when you think about managing the change, there are different tools. So on this first level, this is like the basic things that everyone is talking about, that the change management is talking about. Training, incentives, observability. This is where you can find a really inspiring story, like turning over a low efficiency manufacturing line into high efficiency one because somebody added observability or incentives for quality and stuff like that. This is because people who work there, they don't really have a choice. When we talk about people who have a choice, then you need empathy. And going to an earlier comment, that there might be goals which haven't been verbalized, right? There might be people who just want to keep to the retirement, the job until they retire. Frankly, there is nothing wrong with that. This is the question of whether you want to have those people in your company. That might be people who are getting their happiness elsewhere. It's like if you are a traveler, or if you are into cooking, or if you are into horse riding or something like that, then the job is means to an end, and you don't want to spend more time and more effort on it than needed, right? And then introducing change is kind of difficult in the organization, because those people, it's not that they don't care. They don't want to put more effort than needed, because their happiness doesn't come from the work. They will not benefit from working in a different way. And finally, there is the third group, the top 1%. And that one is extremely tough, because with them, you can only negotiate. This is where mapping can be actually helpful, but not always. Because with those people, you need to understand what drives them. You have to be able to pick them from the crowd and make sure that you are in a position to negotiate with them, because they might use all sorts of tactics to destroy your initiative. My favorite one was, which I have learned in a public body, I think it was a governmental organization somewhere in the world. There was a number of people, civil servants, who were very capable at resisting change. Why? Because when consultant comes to an organization, they have finite time to do the job. The change has to happen in certain time, or consultants will be fired. So those civil servants learned that if they resist for enough time, consultants will be fired and the change will not happen. Again, a case of incentives. And frankly, if those people on the other end, which are against the change, are good at the game and are good at spinning right stories, it's extremely difficult to cope with them, because they might use stories such as, we don't want to invest in that because there are more pressing issues or that doesn't bring any value. They will basically use the same words or as you are using, but against you. And let me just, I will not be covering that given the time. I want to talk about the real leverage on how do you deal with people who are this 1%, because we kind of assume that those are executives on the top. But I have seen examples of organizations in which those roles were completely reversed. Imagine an organization which is producing, let's say, not cars, because there are, imagine that there's an organization producing cars, but the knowledge about how to build a car is distributed amongst people who are working physically on the floor. And management is rotating very fast because they cannot really understand or cannot influence the process. In this situation, the real leverage over the organization is in the hands of people who actually manually assemble cars, not in the managers, because managers can't influence how people on the floor work. They can't even fire them because they don't understand what will be the impact on the organization. And managers in that situation will care about not being fired, right? So in any large organization, you can imagine that there are kingdoms with untouchable people. And if you want to manage a change, you need to have, I don't know, sixth sense, or you have to have at least basic empathy or great observational skills to be able to identify them. Because it's not like they're clear. The position can be anywhere in the hierarchy. Those are just the people, when they say no, nothing will happen in the organization. Another thing which makes change management even more difficult is that, I mean, people, let's say in the middle, they are quite empathetic, right? Because they probably remember times when they haven't had enough, they weren't secure. Right now they are secure, but they are still open to everyone else. But as you are moving up in the hierarchy of an organization, you are losing this capability to empathize with others. And frankly, if you are an executive, your reality is really, really terrible because people either love you or hate you. But there's an asterisk with after the love sign, because they will tell you everything that you want to hear. We know those people, I mean, but the reality for the executive is that for them, everyone behaves in that way. When an executive walks into a room full of employees, usually there is silence, or people are looking at them, or people are trying to be helpful, be noticed, and stuff like that. So executives detach from reality and detach from relationships. And to make things even worse, there are things that managers and executives can't say, and this is where change management goes nightmarish, or at least it went for me. Because imagine that a company is preparing for a merger or acquisition. The process of preparation, or I mean, when you are in talks for a merger or an acquisition, it takes a couple of months. But preparing for it, like pumping up the numbers, cutting the investments, firing people to make the numbers look even better, happens before that. Now, this isn't something that you can announce to your organization that you are right now in preparing for a merger or acquisition, because then your most valuable employees might quit. They will look for safety right now instead of, let's say, supporting your change management. And by the way, if you are in this mode, then your best ideas how to improve the company will fail because they are not aligned with the preparation for a merger or acquisition. Similarly, if the goal of your executive board is just to keep profitability at a high level and your market is shrinking, you can be sure there will be layoffs, but nobody can tell it loud. Each round of layoff is probably the last one, right? Or that's what people like to think. But the reality is that if you are operating in a slowing market, you should assume that change will become extremely difficult. Or finally, there is the pyramid adjustment. Again, it's a very similar case when executives figure out that they have too many senior people and not enough of junior people. Why is that the case? Because the margins on senior people are relatively low and margins on junior people are relatively high. So if you have incorrect pyramid structure or people structure inside your organization, you don't have profitability. If this is the sort of the organization which is going, if this is the sort of the change which your organization is really going through, everything else will fail. Which actually brings me, I mean, I'm mindful of time, which brings me to the change receipt. And if I were to, let's say, issue my recommendation on how to approach change, the first point is to understand the big game. Find out people who really control stuff in your organization and understand what do they want and what they are trying to achieve. Because if you don't fit into this, your change is going to fail. And in Maha stories, we have seen, I mean, in those stories, we have seen two cases where the big game was aligned with the change in the organization. But in the third one, for Pfizer, it looks like it wasn't. Was it? Yeah. Right? Yeah. So this is the interesting case. And again, this is very difficult because people will tell you other things than they are thinking on doing, because probably they either don't want or can't tell you the truth. The next thing is to reduce the scope. And this is, I mean, I'm paraphrasing Dave Snowden here, right? So if there are big changes to be introduced, they are very likely to fail. Start with small experiments which are safe to fail, because if they fail, nothing bad happens. And it's much easier to convince people to change their behavior slightly than to change their behavior a lot. And then there's the normal stuff. Understand who is being affected by the change, what do they really want, including the stuff which isn't talked about. Understand who wins and who loses. This is critical, right? Because people who win because of a change, like imagine you join a company, there is a change going on, and you think that if you support the change, your situation will improve. It bends how people perceive the change, and it bends how people judge the value of the change. So you need to understand who is for and who is against, why they are for and why they are against, and what's the real value of the change, or the most objective one that you can get. And finally, handle stakeholders, which are like the key people controlling, again, not the official stakeholders, but key people controlling what is going on in the organization. And at the end, redo the cost-benefit analysis, because when you go through those steps, when you understand the big game, when you reduce the scope, when you handle or analyze winners, losers, and do everything, which, I mean, I hate this word, but it looks like politics. When you do the political stuff in the change space, it may turn out that the cost-benefit analysis doesn't hold any longer. Right, I'm mindful of time. 2 minutes left. Any questions, comments? Okay, so there is a comment that there was useful to map organization and their various cohorts on the Maslow hierarchy. This is a great comment. I would like to just point out that Maslow's hierarchy is highly structural, and it will be difficult to get right unless you work on your empathy. And this is like a broken record for me, because this is what I have learned as a computer scientist, that you need to work on your empathy and be capable of connecting with other people perhaps without the use of words, which is a very difficult skill. I can say I master it. I'm merely starting with it. But the thing is that you need to be able to feel what other people feel and be able to translate it into your words and then connect it to Maslow's hierarchy. Yeah, thank you. Right, we are on time. Any closing comment, Maha?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Ah, good. Because I lost the window. I can't find it. No, this was. I feel bad. Like I took more than I should have, but. So
It's
my
fine.
excuses. Yeah, I didn't know you were gonna. I thought you were just gonna go through the map, but no. Thank you very much. These are very pertinent observations. They are. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Everyone, we are on time. Thank you for being here. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you and hopefully speak to you in 2 years on the next edition of MapCamp.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.